Hi, I'm Josh, co-founder of Zuplo. In this video, I want to show you how you can take your Supabase backend and turn it into an API-first product that you can monetize as a business. Supabase is a great backend as a service, great open source alternative to Firebase, but it focuses more on being a backend to your front end, so React clients, maybe a mobile client, etc. What if you want to use all of those awesome powers that Supabase offers, like having a database and an API over that database and other things, but you want to turn that into an API first business? Maybe you're the next Stripe or the next Twilio or the next SendGrid. Well, Zuplo can help you do that in record time. Zuplo is a gateway. It sits in between your customers, in this case, and your Supabase backend, and can provide an additional layer of security, of projection and transformation, protection through things like rate limiting, for example. It can help you change how customers authenticate. So if you don't want to use JOT tokens and you'd rather use API keys like Stripe uses and Twilio uses and SendGrid, all of those companies I just mentioned, they choose API keys because they're actually easier for other developers to use. They're super secure, they support revocation. Our keys also are part of the GitHub secret scanning program. So if a key gets checked in, we'll alert you and revoke it, etc. So in addition to that, your customers are going to need a developer portal where they can learn how to use the API that you've put into the world. Zuplo will give you all of those out of the box. And in around 10 minutes now, I'm going to show you how we can take a Supabase backend and turn it into an API first API that's ready for other people to consume. So I'm going to start creating my project in just a second, but first let's take a look at my Supabase project. What we're going to do is build a ski review API. It's just for fun. I'm a big fan of skiing, so I decided to pick this as my topic. You can see I have a table here called skis, has ID created at the make of the ski, the model, the year, what the rating is, and the author. It's all very trivial just for the purposes of demo, but you can do much more complicated stuff, of course. So let's go and create our Zuplo project. And Zuplo is a gateway. So it sits in between your Supabase backend and the people consuming your API. So what we're going to do now, actually, you can see that that's already, in less than 10 seconds, our backend is stood up ready for other people to try, for you to work on. So what we're going to do is start adding some routes to our API that map to the routes that we want to present. It doesn't have to be one-to-one with what's available on Supabase. We can do a subset or even create different routes by merging different tables or transforming data, but we're going to keep it pretty straightforward for this demo. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to create a new route called reviews. It's going to be called get all reviews. And we're going to use versioning, so I'm going to put this on V1, and I'm going to enable cause just in case one of those clients that's using our API is a website, for example. Now I need the actual API. So if I look in here and go to the bash version, you'll see that I can read all rows by hitting this URL. So I'm going to copy that and paste that into my URL rewrite rule here. Notice this contains a bit of query string to tell Supabase what fields I'd like to select. Because of that, I don't want people on the consuming side of my API to be able to tinker with search. Zuplo will actually pass along the headers and the body unless you tell it not to. In this case, I don't want to pass any query string along. I want to be in control and provide a more constrained surface area to my Supabase backend, and Zuplo is going to help me do that. So I'm going to save my changes there. The last thing I need to do is when calling Supabase, I need to call it with some tokens. As you'll see here, it's saying that in order to call this, I need to pass in a key. Now, we're not using JOT tokens for this, really. We're not using like user level JOT tokens. We're going to use the super JOT token because I trust Zuplo to keep my secrets safe. So I'm going to grab one of those tokens now. So if I go over here, click settings, API, and then we're going to use this service role, which is the secret. I'm going to share this with you, but I'll change the key as soon as I finish the video. You shouldn't share that with anybody. And then we're going to put this into Zuplo. Now, normally I'd put this in environment variables, which is a more secure place to store assets in Zuplo. But since I'm just giving a quick demo, I'm just going to store it directly in the policy here. So we're going to add a policy that adds a header. And this is going to add the header on what we call the sort of outbound request. So a request comes in from the client, hits Zuplo. Zuplo is then going to forward that request onto Supabase. And when it forwards it on, it's going to add these headers so that I can authenticate against the Supabase endpoint. So the first header is going to be called API key. And I'm just going to paste the value of my token in there. Again, normally I'd put that in an environment variable, but for now, I'm just going to keep it straight, nice and easy. And then we're also going to send the authorization header. And the value is going to be bearer space that token. And overwrite is going to be true. So I click OK. And now when the request comes into my Zuplo, it's going to add those. I also want to do one other thing. We don't want to listen. We don't want to forward anything on that comes from the customer. We don't trust the client. So we're actually going to clear the headers. We're going to do that before we get to this section. So I'm going to save that change. And now with a bit of luck, if I actually click this button here, what that's going to do is open up this route for me. And you can see we're actually pulling the data through Supabase. How easy was that? So notice this is not my Supabase URL. We're actually pulling the data through from Supabase. So that's pretty cool. Now we want to do a post. So I'm going to allow people to create reviews. So I'm going to change the post here. I'm going to do it on the same endpoint, reviews. It's also going to be V1. I also want this to support cores, but notice how we can have really fine-grained controls. And this is going to be called create review. I'm going to add the same policies. I'm going to reuse them. So notice how they're up there. So set headers inbound, so nice and reusable. I'm going to save that. And now what I need to do is to test posting into my backend. But I also want to do one more thing. I want to make sure that we're not accepting any old nonsense from our clients. So I actually want to do JSON schema validation on the incoming body. And the way I'm going to do that is by using our JSON body validation policy. You'll see it here. JSON body validation. But to set this up, I need a JSON schema. So I'm going to go and create a JSON schema now using one of my favorite tools in this space, which is jasonschema.net. And this will generate a schema based on an example document. So here is an example JSON document. You can see it has the make, the model, the rating, the year, and the author of the ski. Those are columns in my database table. And this just takes a second, but it's going to generate me a database schema. So let's copy that. And then we're going to add a schema here called reviews. I'll get a little error until I fix this. Yep, save that. So now I have a JSON schema that describes the document that is allowed on insert. So let's go back to routes. I'm going to add that as a policy, JSON body validation, and I'm going to specify that it's the review schema. Or was it reviews? Reviews.json. Okay, awesome. So I save that. And actually, I think I should probably put this at the front. Might as well do the validation before we start setting the headers. If I post an invalid document to this, it's going to be rejected and say that this did not meet the schema. So let's try it. To test this out, I'm actually going to use our built-in test client, but you can use Postman or Insomnia or Curl or whatever your favorite tool is. I'm going to add a manual test here called create review. And that's going to be a post on v1/reviews. I don't need to set any headers because I've basically not secured Zuplo yet. I will do in a minute, meaning it's a public API. So I've actually just created a fully public API on using Zuplo that's backed by Supabase. But we're going to change that in a minute. And so now I need to paste in a body. Actually, let's use the same body I used as an example, but I'm going to break it. So let's say that we said like ratsing instead of rating, like there's a typo. If I hit test, I'll get a 400 bad request. And if I look, it says schema validation failed. Incoming body did not pass schema validation. Body must have required property rating. So it's actually helping me out. So let's go and try this. Let's do rating, hit test, and I got a 405. Why is that? Oh, I didn't fix. It's telling me here you forwarded to welcome.zuplo.io. So I didn't quite fix setting up my route. So let's go and do that. So notice here I'm posting to the wrong endpoint. I need to post to, let's go back to my Supabase example. And when it says insert row, I need this URL. So I'm going to copy that, paste that in, hit save. And with a bit of luck, once that finished saving, I will be live. I can hit test. And now I get a 201 created, no response in the body. So it looks like it created a record. Let's go and check that. So if I go to tables here, skis, and boom, you can see DPS Pagoda just created just now, 11, 14, 22, 35. That's the right time. You can see it was created by Josh. Rating is 5. So wow, we just created a API that can be consumed publicly. The other thing that's happening in the background here that's kind of magical actually is we are generating, based on the information you're giving us, we're generating a developer portal that you can share with your developers. So if I click on this link here, we'll open up that developer portal. You can see it tells me about my API. It says it has a get all reviews method. I haven't customized this content. I can customize that as well. It has a create review. Based on the JSON schema body, it tells me what the body looks like, has an author make, even gives me an example, actually like the one I shared. Shows me how to call this from curl or from PowerShell or Kotlin, or, whatever your language of choice is, will generate an example for you. Notice how it talks about authentication. So actually, let's make it so that we're now protecting this API, but we're going to use API keys. A lot of API first companies think API keys are the best solution because they're easier for developers to use and they're plenty secure. So let's go and add API key authentication to our routes. So I'm going to add a new policy. It's actually the first one there, API key authentication. I can accept all of these defaults. I'm going to make that the first policy. We might as well require that at the beginning. I'll add it to this one as well. API key auth, make that the front, hit save. And so now, if I try and call that API to create a review, you'll see I get a 401 unauthorized. That's because I don't have an API key. So where do I get my API keys? Well, actually, I can get them inside the developer portal. We make it easy for you to have self-service for your developers so they can manage their own keys. So what I'm going to do is go here, settings, API key consumers, and we have an API for this, but we're going to do it manually. And I'm going to specify an identity of somebody who can access my API. So I'm going to call this, Evo is one of my favorite ski shops. Let's pretend they're a customer. I'm going to use my email because I'm giving the demo, but I could put a list of emails in here who can manage this. And I'm going to put in some metadata like maybe author, Evo. We could do other things like customer type, free. We can put anything here. It's just free form JSON that will be associated with this identity. So I'm going to save that. And so now I have an Evo consumer managed by an email address, and I don't have any active keys yet. So if I go to my developer portal here, by the way, we have dark mode, which obviously you need these days. I'm going to sign in. I'm going to sign in with my josh@zooplo.com email address. And what we should see is this will load and it'll say, oh, you have some API keys, but there's no keys for this identity. So do you want to create a key? So I'm going to create a key. Notice the format of this key is quite unique. That's because it takes part in the GitHub key revocation program. If that key gets checked into source control, we can revoke it, send you an email, send your customer an email so that they know that their key has leaked and we keep you secure. I'm going to copy this now. And then I'm going to use my test client here. I'm going to add the, if you remember, if we call this without that key, we get a 401. I think we should do a different ski now. What's one of my favorite skis? K2. Was it called a Barracuda? Something like that. It would be like 2017. Oops. 2017 rating was a 4 maybe. And let's post that. With a bit of luck, this will go through. Now I get a 201. So what was a public API is now protected by API keys that are much easier for businesses to use and manage when calling your API. So we've just helped you go API first. A couple of other things I want to show you quickly. Another thing you need on any API, particularly if you have an API program, is you need protection. And so we're going to add some rate limiting here. Let's add the rate limit We're going to do it based on user. So each user identity gets their own protection. Gets their own bucket, if you will, for API. We're going to say one request per user. I'm going to put that ahead of everything except the API key. We need to know who the user is, so they've got to authenticate first. I'll add that policy again here, rate limit inbound. Let's drag it up. There are ways of reusing these policies and creating composite groups so you don't have to put them in every route, because you're going to end up with a lot of routes with most APIs. I'm not showing that because this is a simple demo. But if I go back here now and I start trying to hit the, let's actually use the get API, get reviews. You can set different rate limits on post, on create, of course, but get v1/reviews. I will get a 401, but if I add my key, authorization, bearer, paste that key in. Now it'll work, but if I try and hit it again, I'll get 429 too many requests. So we added rate limiting to our API. So that's how quickly you can go from having a Supabase backend with all the power that Supabase offers to having a API that you can run and operate as a business, where you can provide access to your partners or to your customers using API keys. And of course, we've added rate limiting protection as well. We include a web application firewall in the product, so extremely secure. But I want to show you a couple of other things. Now, I mentioned Zuplo will forward on requests. So you can still use Zuplo, and instead of using API keys, you could actually forward on the JOT token. And to do that, you would just have a different route that wouldn't ask for API key authentication. It wouldn't clear the headers and it wouldn't set the headers. It will just forward the JOT token onto the back end. So we can sort of act on behalf, but you can still turn on rate limiting for access to that. And you can write custom rules. One of the coolest things about Zuplo, though, is the ability to write custom code. So one thing I don't like about our design so far is that the user tells us in the content who the author is. What if I don't like that? What if I'd actually rather add that to the request myself based on the JOT token? Well, that's pretty easy to do, and you can write custom rules. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new module here called reviews. And we're going to add some code. Actually, I'm going to borrow it from here a little bit, my template. I'm going to add some code that handles the incoming request for me. And instead of calling this default, I'm going to export async function create review. And what we're going to do in this code is we're basically going to read the incoming body. So const data equals await request.json. We know it's going to be JSON, so that's the incoming body. I'm then going to grab the current user, const user equals request.user, and we're going to set the data.author equals request.user.sub. So the sub is the identity of the user, the subject in JOT terminology. And then we're going to say, let's see, return new request. So what this is a pipeline component. You can do all kinds of fun things. We're really extending the programming model of Zuplo here. Actually, I'm not going to return a request. This is actually a handler. So what I'm going to do is serialize that data payload and send that onto the backend instead. So I will return the response, but the fetch we're going to make is going to be somewhat customized. So let's go and grab that URL. This was the one to insert data, right? Okay, got it. And we're going to do a post. So method is post. This is web standards code, by the way. The headers, once again, I need to specify those headers. Again, you can store all this stuff in an environment variable. I'm not doing it for now because I'm being lazy, but that's what you should do. So let me go and grab that JOT token again. is in my settings, API, reveal copy. I'm gonna paste that in here and in here. And then the body of my post is going to be data, JSON.stringify data. So what it's going to do is it's going to take the incoming data, it's going to set the author property to the user's subject, and then it's going to post that on to Supabase. So I just need to hook this up now. So instead of doing a URL rewrite, I'm going to call a function. I can use my function explorer here. It says reviews create review function. So that code is going to get invoked. And actually, just to show you that in action, let's have a bit of fun here. So we're gonna do a bit of logging. So I'm going to say context.log.info data. And actually, let's write that out so we can see what we're doing. Then I'm going to do the same thing again with the user, context.log.info user. We're going to log the user. And then once we've done the addition, let's log it again. We'll call it data2, data. Okay, so let's save that. Let's go back to our test client. We're going to create a new review. This time I'm not going to specify the author because I don't trust it. It actually would be overwritten. I'll show you that in a moment. So let's make a new ski called a Rossignol. I can't think of another name of a ski right now, so I'm going to call it fake ski. The rating's 1 because it's fake. And so if I hit test here, you'll see, I get, because look at this. Yeah. So my JSON schema validation's kicking in. It says you need an author. So I just need to go and change my JSON schema to say author isn't required anymore. So here it is. If we look in here, we'll see the author field. Let's remove that and remove it from the required fields up here. Hit save and we should be good. And if I go back and try again, then I want to see a few things here. So we still got a 400 bad request. I did not set the content type correctly on my outbound post. So let's go and do that. Write a little bit more code here. Save my change, hit create review, hit test. And I got a 201 created. So it worked. I just had to set the content type on the outbound request. So notice a couple of things here. So I get live logging about this data coming through. You can see it's actually showing me what's going on in the request. And notice how the author is set to Evo because that was the subject of the incoming user, which is pretty cool. And if I go back to my database table, where is it? Here we go, table, skis. Notice that Evo is the author. So even if I tried to force my hand and tried to insert that author, what's going to happen? So if I go here, there's a couple of protections. I'm going to pretend it was a different author called Don. I hit test. I'm inside the rate limiter now, so I'm going to have to wait a minute. It's okay, we can fix that. We can actually just go and adjust the rate limit policy. I'm just going to take it out of that route for now. Hit save, but you can see everything's working as intended. I'm going to try again, and now it makes it through. And it said author is created, but notice that the author is still Evo. We didn't trust this additional information. Now we could make it actually even stricter. If we go and change this schema validation and say allow, gonna have to remind myself what the property is. JSON schema, allow additional properties. It's just additional properties is the value. There we go. And I say additional properties are not allowed. then it should actually reject the fact that author isn't specified here, so it's not allowed. Like, don't try and send an author. That is an invalid request. 400, bad request. Body must not have additional properties. So you can see how Zuplo helps you make your API more secure, helps protect you against things like attacks, or usually the reason you need rate limiting is accidental code or a for loop gets triggered. How it helps you have a developer portal, helps you choose your authentication method that you like. Do you want to do JOT authentication or API key authentication, or even both? And ship your API in record time. Try it out.